On Christmas Eve, my parents passed out presents labeled for the grandkids who made us proud. My children were completely ignored, while my sister's daughter laughed and said, "Guess you didn't earn one." I didn't argue or make a scene. I quietly gathered my kids and walked out. The next morning, I sent a single message: "Never invite us back again. We're not here to be your joke." The sharp, brittle sound of Madison's laughter still echoes in my memory, a cruel, ringing clarity against the backdrop of soft Christmas carols and the scent of pine. "Guess you didn't deserve one," she'd chirped, her voice perfectly innocent, clutching a brand new tablet that shimmered under the warm glow of the Christmas tree lights. In that moment, the entire world seemed to tilt on its axis, a slow, sickening lurch that stole the air from my lungs. My sons, Travis and Owen, sat frozen on the carpet, their small bodies hunched, eyes fixed on their empty hands, and then on my face, searching for an answer I didn't immediately have. That Christmas Eve, it felt like the very fabric of our family had been torn, not with a violent rip, but with a quiet, insidious unraveling. Just hours before, the December darkness had felt like a velvet curtain, parting to reveal the promise of holiday joy. Headlights sliced through the falling snow as I navigated my old pickup, each flake a lazy, luminous spiral against the windshield. Travis, all gangly limbs and preteen earnestness at 11, had practically vibrated in the passenger seat. 8-year-old Owen, still possessing that boundless, fearless wonder, tugged on my sleeve from the back, his small voice bright. "Dad, do you think Grandma made her chocolate chip cookies?" Travis's breath fogged the window as he pressed his face to the glass. "And hot chocolate with little marshmallows," Owen chimed in, a hopeful lilt in his tone. "I'd bet money on both," I'd told them, killing the engine and turning to face my boys, the very air in the truck thick with their infectious excitement. Sarah, their mother, would have loved this. She'd been gone 3 years now, a void carved into the landscape of our lives by a cancer that cared nothing for fairness or timing. It didn't pause for a husband begging for just one more year, one more month, one more day. The grief had consumed pieces of me I hadn't known existed. But these two, my boys, they were the anchors that kept me tethered, kept me moving forward when every fiber of my being screamed to just stop. We wrestled the carefully wrapped presents from the trunk, boxes that had taken me an embarrassing amount of time to get just right. Sarah had always handled the gift wrapping, her fingers nimble with ribbon and tape, while I, bless my clumsy hands, would inevitably create a crumpled mess. But I'd learned. You learn all the things you never thought you'd have to do alone. The front door swung open before we even reached the porch, a sudden rectangle of warm, golden light spilling across the snow. My mother, framed in the doorway, her apron dusted with flour, her smile as bright as any Christmas star, called out, "There are my favorite grandsons." Her arms were already outstretched. Travis and Owen, a whirlwind of youthful energy, surged forward, nearly knocking her off her feet. I followed, packages clutched awkwardly, attempting to shake the snow from my coat. "Careful with Grandma," I warned, but she was already laughing, embracing them tightly, a rapid-fire interrogation about school and sports and every detail of their young lives tumbling from her lips. My father materialized behind her, his reading glasses perched on his head, a dish towel slung casually over his shoulder. "Let them breathe, Linda. They just got here." The house itself was a living, breathing testament to Christmas. The air was thick with the scent of pine from the massive tree in the living room, a whisper of cinnamon from whatever my mother had baking, and that indefinable, enveloping warmth that only a home filled with family can generate. Soft holiday music drifted from the ancient stereo system, and every surface seemed to glitter with decades of accumulated decorations, each one a miniature memory. My sister, Vanessa, was already ensconced on the couch with her husband, Keith, and their daughter, Madison. They'd flown in from Seattle the previous day, occupying the guest rooms, as was their holiday tradition. Vanessa looked different. Her hair was shorter, sharper, and her clothes bore that expensive sheen that hinted at Keith's recent promotion. "Look who finally made it," she remarked, glancing up from her phone, a casual dismissal in her tone. Madison, beside her, remained absorbed in a game on her tablet, barely acknowledging our arrival. "Traffic was rough," I replied, carefully placing our gifts under the already burgeoning mountain of wrapped boxes, a veritable avalanche in varying sizes and colors. Keith rose, offering a firm handshake, the kind of practiced, corporate smile he'd perfected over years of business meetings. "Good to see you, Nathan. How's the law business treating you?" We fell into the familiar rhythm of family small talk, the surface pleasantries about jobs and weather, filling the spaces between our infrequent visits. Travis and Owen, bless their hearts, had already disappeared into the kitchen with my mother, no doubt hot on the trail of those promised cookies. Madison, however, remained glued to her screen, her thumbs flying across the glass with practiced speed. Dinner was, as always, a glorious chaos. Plates were passed, voices overlapped, and laughter punctuated the comfortable din. My mother had outdone herself, a succulent ham, creamy mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and rolls so fresh they steamed when you broke them open. Travis ate with the unrestrained appetite of an 11-year-old, while Owen meticulously constructed each perfect bite before delicately consuming it. "How's school going, boys?" my father asked between servings. Travis, swallowing quickly, beamed. "Really good, Grandpa. I made honor roll again, and Coach says I might make varsity baseball next year, even though I'm only in 6th grade. A fierce surge of pride swelled in my chest. Sarah and I had always prioritized education, celebrated every achievement, no matter how small. "That's wonderful," my mother exclaimed, her smile radiating pure delight. "And you, Owen?" Owen sat up straighter, his voice clear. "I won the science fair at my school. My volcano was the best one, and I got to present it to all the 3rd and 4th graders." "He'd worked on that project for 2 months," I added, remembering the kitchen counter buried under papier-mâché and paint, the meticulous measurements of baking soda and vinegar. He'd approached that volcano with the dedication of a true scientist, researching tectonic plates, crafting a presentation board, and practicing his speech in front of me at least 20 times. The pure joy on his face when he'd won first place had been worth every late night. Travis, too, had been his brother's biggest cheerleader. These were the moments that defined us now, the ways we showed up for each other in Sarah's absence. We were a team. Vanessa, however, barely glanced up from the task of cutting Madison's ham into smaller, more manageable pieces. "That's nice. Madison just qualified for the state spelling bee. She's already studying words most adults don't even know." The conversation, as it often did, seamlessly shifted to Madison's accomplishments, piano recitals, dance competitions, her advanced reading level, the expensive tutoring sessions. I didn't begrudge my niece her success. She was a bright, hard-working kid. But something in Vanessa's tone always carried an edge, a subtle implication that her daughter's achievements somehow eclipsed everyone else's, casting a faint shadow over any other celebration. After dinner, the gravitational pull of the living room and the towering Christmas tree drew us in for the traditional gift exchange. This was always my favorite part of Christmas Eve, watching faces illuminate with surprise and gratitude. Travis and Owen settled onto the carpet near the tree, their eyes wide with anticipation. My father took his usual command post in the recliner, my mother perched on its arm. Keith and Vanessa claimed the couch, Madison wedged between them. "All right," my father announced, rubbing his hands together, "let's see what Santa brought this year." But instead of the usual methodical distribution, starting with the youngest, my mother stood with an odd, deliberate purpose. She selected several boxes, medium-sized, wrapped in identical silver paper with crisp red bows. "We did something different this year," she announced, her voice resonating with an unfamiliar formality. "Your father and I wanted to recognize the grandchildren who have made us especially proud." A cold, heavy dread began to congeal in my stomach, spreading outward like ice water through my veins. Travis and Owen exchanged a confused glance. My mother presented the first box to Madison. "For our granddaughter, who shows such remarkable dedication to her studies." Madison tore into the paper with unrestrained enthusiasm, revealing the latest model tablet, an expensive piece of tech far beyond the one she currently owned. "Thanks, Grandma," she squealed, immediately powering it on. Vanessa's smile was a dazzling, triumphant beacon. "Mom, Dad, you didn't have to do that. We wanted to," my father said, his expression unreadable. "She's earned it." I waited, my breath held, for my mother to reach for more boxes, to present something to Travis and Owen, who sat perfectly still, radiating a desperate, quiet hope. But she simply returned to her seat, her hands empty, as if the gift-giving had concluded. That's it. I heard my own voice, sharper, more cutting than I'd intended. My mother's smile flickered. We just wanted to do something special for Madison this year. She's accomplished so much. Travis's face had gone carefully blank, the way children's faces do when they're trying desperately to hide a profound hurt. Owen's lower lip trembled, then disappeared as he caught it between his teeth. And my boys haven't? The question hung in the air, a live wire, heavy and dangerous. Vanessa sighed, an exasperated, put-upon sound. Don't be dramatic, Nathan. It's just a gift. The boys will get plenty of things from Santa. Then Madison, still basking in the glow of her new device, chimed in, her voice carrying that particular, brutal innocence only children can deliver. Guess you didn't deserve one. The silence that followed was suffocating, a vacuum that sucked the air from the room. I could hear the faint, rhythmic ticking of the mantel clock, the distant hum of the refrigerator. Travis stared at his hands, his small frame rigid. Owen's eyes were glassy with unshed tears. Every instinct screamed at me to erupt, to defend my children, to make someone, anyone, understand the profound wrongness of this moment. But in the 3 years since Sarah's death, I'd learned a brutal truth. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is walk away. Educational Insight 1. The invisible wounds of favoritism. Children inherently seek validation and love from their primary caregivers. When one child is openly favored over others, it can inflict deep psychological wounds. The unfavored child often develops feelings of inadequacy, resentment, and a diminished sense of self-worth, struggling to understand why their efforts or existence are deemed less valuable. This perceived rejection can shape their relationships and self-perception well into adulthood. Boys, I said, my voice barely a whisper, a strange calm descending upon me. I stood. Get your coats. Nathan, don't be ridiculous, my mother began, but I held up a hand, silencing her. We're leaving. You're really going to make a scene over this? Vanessa demanded, incredulity lacing every word. They're just kids. They don't even understand what the big deal is. I looked at my sons, at their hunched shoulders and downcast eyes, and I knew she was utterly, profoundly wrong. They understood perfectly. They understood that their grandmother had stood before them and declared them less worthy, less deserving of recognition, less deserving of pride. They understood that their carefully cultivated accomplishments meant nothing in comparison to their cousins. Come on, boys. I kept my voice level, refusing to let the rage I felt boil over. We gathered our coats in a heavy, brittle silence while my parents remained frozen, as if they couldn't quite believe this was happening. Keith cleared his throat, an awkward, gravelly sound. Maybe everyone just needs to calm down and talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. I helped Owen with his zipper, his small hands trembling too much to manage it himself. We're done here. You're overreacting, my father offered, but his tone lacked conviction. I met his eyes across the room. Am I? Tell me, Dad. What did Travis and Owen do to deserve being humiliated in front of the whole family? What crime did they commit that made them unworthy of your pride? He didn't answer. Neither did my mother, who had gone very pale, very quiet. We walked out into the biting December cold, leaving behind the manufactured warmth, the shimmering lights, and the mountain of unopened presents. The boys climbed into the car without a word, their silence heavier than any accusation. I started the engine, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. The drive home was a desolate stretch of quiet. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching them stare out at the passing streetlights, their small figures silhouetted against the dark. When we finally pulled into our driveway, neither of them moved to unbuckle their seat belts. Dad. Travis's voice was a small, fragile thing in the darkness. Did we do something wrong? The question shattered something in me. I twisted in my seat, turning to face them. These two boys who had lost their mother and still managed to greet each morning with a fragile hope. No, I said, my voice firm, resolute. You did nothing wrong. Not one single thing. Then why did Grandma only give Madison a present? Owen asked, the hurt in his voice almost unbearable. How do you explain to children that sometimes the people who are supposed to love them unconditionally fail to do so? How do you make sense of cruelty dressed up as tradition? Sometimes adults make mistakes, I said carefully, choosing my words. Sometimes they forget what really matters. We went inside, and I made hot chocolate the way Sarah used to, with extra marshmallows and a generous sprinkle of cinnamon. We sat at the kitchen table, just the three of us, and I let them talk, or sit in silence, whatever they needed. Eventually, they went to bed. I sat alone in the dark living room, staring at our own Christmas tree, with its modest, unthreatening pile of presents underneath. My phone had been a constant buzz since we left, messages piling up from my mother, Vanessa, even Keith. I ignored them all, until the house was quiet, and the boys were asleep. Then I opened my messages. My mother's texts were a cascade of placation, asking me to understand, insisting they'd never meant to hurt anyone. Vanessa's messages were defensive, accusatory, painting me as dramatic, sensitive, unwilling to see things from their perspective. I deleted every single one without responding. Instead, I opened a new text thread to the family group chat that included my parents, Vanessa, and Keith. I stared at the blank screen for a long time, all the anger and disappointment churning within me. But Sarah's voice, a quiet echo in my memory, reminded me that dignity was often more powerful than rage. I typed out a single, stark sentence. Don't ever invite us again. We're not your punchline. Then I turned off my phone and went to bed. I thought walking away was the hardest part. I was wrong. The hardest part was just beginning. Christmas morning arrived with a fresh blanket of snow and weak winter sunlight. Travis and Owen crept into my room at dawn, just as they had every Christmas morning since they were old enough to walk, their excitement tentative, but present. We went downstairs together, and I watched their faces light up with genuine joy as they opened the presents I'd carefully selected and wrapped: books, games, the specific things they'd asked for. We made pancakes for breakfast, burning the first batch because Owen, ever the curious one, misjudged the timing of the flip. We laughed about it, a small, fragile sound, but it felt like healing. My phone stayed off all morning. When I finally turned it back on that afternoon, the messages had multiplied exponentially. My mother's tone was now genuinely apologetic, begging me to reconsider. Vanessa, apparently, had already disseminated her version of events to the extended family, because messages arrived from cousins and aunts, some supportive, some critical of my dramatic exit. I responded only to those who seemed genuinely concerned, explaining simply that we'd been disrespected and had chosen to leave rather than subject my children to further hurt. To everyone else, I said nothing. The days after Christmas brought an unexpected cascade of consequences. My mother called repeatedly, her voice trembling in the voicemail messages she left. She insisted she hadn't meant any harm, that she'd just wanted to do something special for Madison, that she'd never intended for Travis and Owen to feel excluded. But intention, as Sarah had taught me during our marriage, doesn't erase impact. Vanessa's approach was, predictably, different. She showed up at my office 3 days later, breezing past my secretary with the kind of confident entitlement that came from a lifetime of getting her way. "You embarrassed Mom and Dad," she declared, without preamble, settling into the chair across from my desk. "They're devastated." I set down the legal brief I'd been reviewing. "And my sons, how do you think they felt?" "Kids are resilient. They'll get over it." "Is that really what you think?" I challenged, my voice calm but firm. "That we should just teach children to accept being treated as less than because it's convenient for the adults in their lives?" Vanessa crossed her arms, her jaw tight. "One gift, Nathan. You're destroying family relationships over one gift." It wasn't about the gift. I leaned back in my chair, studying my sister's face, seeing a stranger there. It was about what that gift represented. It was about standing in front of my children and announcing to the entire family that they weren't good enough to be recognized, weren't worthy of pride. That's not what happened. That's exactly what happened. And then your daughter laughed at them, rubbed salt in the wound, and nobody said a word to correct her. Vanessa's expression shifted, an uncomfortable flicker. "Madison's just a kid. She didn't understand. Maybe someone should teach her." I stood, a clear signal that the conversation was over. I meant what I said in that text. We're not coming back to play happy family while my children are treated like second-class citizens. She left angry, slamming my office door hard enough to rattle the frame. My secretary poked her head in a moment later, concern etched on her face. Everything okay? Family drama, I said with a weak smile. Nothing that won't pass eventually. But I wasn't sure that was true. The fracture between Vanessa and me had been widening for years, if I was honest. Since Keith's career had taken off and they'd moved to Seattle, there had been a subtle shift in how she viewed the rest of us, an unspoken judgment. Money changes people, or perhaps it just reveals what has always been there beneath the surface. She'd started making comments about life choices and maximizing potential, thinly veiled criticisms of my decision to stay at a mid-sized firm rather than pursuing partnership at a major corporate practice. Sarah had always defended me, pointing out that I'd chosen a career that allowed me to be present for my family, that not everyone measured success by the size of their salary. Without Sarah's voice to counter Vanessa's judgment, the distance between us had grown wider with each passing year. Educational insight too. The dynamics of enabling and familial manipulation. In family systems, manipulation often thrives when others, perhaps out of a desire for peace, avoid confrontation, or a misplaced sense of loyalty, enable the behavior. Enablers, consciously or unconsciously, allow destructive patterns to persist by not setting firm boundaries or holding individuals accountable. This can lead to a distorted reality where the manipulator feels justified and the enablers become complicit in the harm caused. Breaking this cycle requires courage and a willingness to disrupt established, albeit unhealthy, norms. The new year arrived quietly. Travis and Owen returned to school, and life settled back into our familiar routines. Travis made the varsity baseball team, just as his coach had predicted, and came home with a permission slip for tournaments that would run through spring. Owen, ever the builder, started a new project, this time a model solar system with meticulous attention to scale and detail. My parents sent gifts for both boys' birthdays, packages arriving with cards signed by both of them, but clearly in my mother's familiar handwriting. The messages were generic, wishing them happiness and growth, mentioning how proud they were, but conspicuously devoid of any specific references to actual accomplishments. I let the boys decide whether to call and say thank you. Travis did, keeping the conversation brief and polite. Owen asked me to send a text instead, unwilling to hear his grandmother's voice. Spring brought baseball season and parent-teacher conferences where I learned that both my sons were excelling, academically and socially. Travis's teacher mentioned how kind he was to new students, how he'd taken a boy who had just moved from another state under his wing. Owen's teacher praised his creativity and his willingness to help classmates who struggled with concepts he'd already mastered. These were the moments I wished Sarah could see, the tangible proof that we were raising good humans despite the grief and loss that had shattered our lives. I took photos at Travis's games and videos of Owen's science presentations, documenting these achievements, not for anyone else, but for my sons themselves. So they would know that someone saw them, recognized them, celebrated them. My mother tried calling on Mother's Day. I let it go to voicemail, unable to navigate the complicated feelings that holiday always stirred up. Sarah's absence was always acutely felt on days designed to honor mothers, and adding my own mother's betrayal to that grief felt like too much to bear. The message she left was tearful, apologizing again, begging for a chance to make things right. I saved it, without responding, not quite ready to forgive, but not quite ready to completely close that door either. I was still processing all of it. Summer arrived with its promise of freedom and adventure. I'd arranged my schedule to work from home more often, wanting to be present for the boys. We took a road trip to the Grand Canyon, just the three of us, camping under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Travis taught Owen how to identify constellations, and Owen, in turn, regaled us with facts about planetary formations and astronomical distances. Sitting around the campfire on our last night, watching sparks rise into the darkness, Owen asked the question I'd been bracing myself for. "Do you think Grandma and Grandpa miss us?" Travis looked at me, his expression older than his 12 years, waiting to see how I'd answer. "I think they probably do," I said honestly. "But missing someone and treating them right are two different things." "Will we ever see them again?" Travis pressed. That depends on them, I said, poking at the fire with a stick, watching the logs shift and settle. If they can truly understand why what they did was wrong, if they can genuinely change and commit to treating you both with the respect and recognition you deserve, then maybe someday. But you don't think they will? Owen said, and it wasn't a question. I don't know, I admitted, looking at both my sons, their faces illuminated by the flickering firelight. But I do know that you two deserve to be around people who see your worth, who celebrate your achievements, who make you feel valued. Life's too short to accept anything less. We drove home the next day, sun-kissed and content, our memory cards full of photos, our hearts full of experiences that would bind us together even tighter. My house felt more like home than my parents' place ever had, filled with the specific chaos of our small family and the love we'd built in the aftermath of losing Sarah. August brought the familiar preparations for a new school year. Travis was heading into 7th grade, already dreaming of high school and college. Owen was entering 4th grade, his curiosity undiminished, his enthusiasm for learning infectious. The day before school started, an envelope arrived in the mail addressed to me, in my father's distinctive, careful handwriting. Inside was a letter, 3 pages, written in the precise script he always reserved for important documents. He wrote about regret and understanding, about long conversations with my mother where they'd finally grappled with the magnitude of their mistake. He explained that Vanessa had been subtly, persistently pushing them for years to favor Madison, playing on their pride in her accomplishments, undermining my son's achievements in comparison. He admitted they'd been weak, had allowed themselves to be influenced, had failed in their fundamental duty as grandparents to love and support all their grandchildren equally. The letter even included specific examples of things Travis and Owen had done that made them proud, detailed observations that proved they had been paying attention, even when I thought they hadn't noticed. He wrote about honor roll certificates and science fair victories, about kindness shown to others and resilience demonstrated in the face of loss. The final paragraph was an invitation, carefully worded and steeped in humility. They wanted a chance to apologize directly to Travis and Owen, to begin rebuilding trust, if we were willing to allow it. They understood if we weren't ready, respected our right to maintain boundaries, but hoped we might consider giving them an opportunity to do better. Educational Insight 3. Intention versus Impact in Interpersonal Relationships. A common pitfall in human interaction, particularly within families, is focusing solely on one's intention while overlooking the actual impact of one's actions. While good intentions can mitigate guilt, they do not erase the hurt caused. True reconciliation requires an honest acknowledgement of the impact, genuine remorse, and a willingness to understand the other person's experience, irrespective of one's original motive. This shift from "I didn't mean to "I'm sorry for the pain I caused" is crucial for rebuilding trust. I read the letter 3 times, sitting at the kitchen table while the boys watched television in the other room. Part of me wanted to crumple it, to maintain the wall I'd built between us and the people who had hurt my children. But another part, the part that remembered my mother's chocolate chip cookies and my father teaching me to ride a bike, wanted to believe that people could change, could grow, could make amends for their failures. I called them that evening, after the boys had gone to bed. My mother answered on the first ring, her voice breathless, with a mix of hope and fear. "Nathan, I got Dad's letter." "We meant every word," she said quickly. "We've been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of talking. We understand now how badly we hurt Travis and Owen, and you too. It's not about me. No, but you're their father. Your pain matters too." We talked for an hour, the longest conversation we'd had since that Christmas Eve. She explained how Vanessa had slowly poisoned the well, making casual comments about Madison's superiority, comparing milestones in ways that diminished my son's accomplishments. She admitted they'd been susceptible to that manipulation because Vanessa was their daughter, and they'd wanted to support her, but in doing so had betrayed their responsibilities to their other grandchildren. When my father took the phone, his voice was thick with emotion. He apologized without excuses, without trying to justify or minimize what had happened. He simply acknowledged the harm, expressed genuine remorse, and asked what they could do to begin making it right. I told them I needed to talk to Travis and Owen first, to see if they were even interested in reconnecting. I explained that any relationship moving forward would have to be built on consistent, demonstrated change, not just promises and pretty words. They agreed to everything, grateful just to have the conversation. The next morning, over breakfast, I showed the boys the letter. They read it together, Travis's finger following the lines while Owen leaned against his shoulder. When they finished, they looked at each other in that silent communication siblings share, an entire conversation without words. "What do you think?" I asked, not wanting to influence their decision. Travis set down the letter. "I think people make mistakes. Even big ones," Owen added, looking at me for guidance. "Especially big ones." I poured myself more coffee, giving them time to process. "But the question isn't whether they made a mistake. It's whether you believe they understand why it was wrong, and whether you trust them to do better. Can we think about it?" Travis asked. "Take all the time you need." They discussed it between themselves over the next few days, private conversations I caught fragments of but didn't intrude upon. I watched them weigh forgiveness against hurt, hope against caution, and felt a profound pride in their thoughtfulness, even as my heart ached for the maturity forced upon them by circumstances beyond their control. Finally, one evening, while we were making dinner together, Owen spoke up. "We want to see Grandma and Grandpa," he said, stirring a pasta sauce with intense concentration. "But not at their house. Somewhere neutral, like a restaurant," Travis suggested, ever the pragmatic one. "Somewhere public?" I nodded, understanding the inherent wisdom in their choice. A public setting meant safety, meant they could leave if things went badly, meant the grandparents couldn't retreat into familiar patterns in the comfort of their own home. We arranged to meet at a family-friendly restaurant the following Saturday afternoon. My parents arrived early. I could see them through the window when we pulled into the parking lot, sitting at a table, talking quietly. My mother's hands were clasped tightly. My father kept adjusting his silverware. Small, nervous gestures that betrayed their anxiety. Travis and Owen walked in ahead of me, and I watched my parents' faces light up at the sight of them, a raw mix of joy, relief, and desperate hope. My mother stood, but didn't rush forward, respecting the space the boys needed. My father remained seated, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Thank you for coming," my mother said softly as we approached the table. We sat down, the boys on either side of me, creating a quiet, united front. The waitress came to take drink orders, providing a welcome distraction as everyone settled into the awkwardness of the moment. My father cleared his throat. "Boys, your grandmother and I owe you an apology." What followed was one of the most honest conversations I'd ever witnessed between my parents and anyone. They apologized directly to Travis and Owen, explaining without making excuses, acknowledging the specific hurt they'd caused. They talked about the changes they'd been making, the boundaries they'd set with Vanessa, the work they'd been doing to understand their own failures. Travis listened, his arms crossed, his expression guarded. Owen's face was more open, more willing to believe, but I could still see the caution there. When they finished, my father looked at both boys with profound sadness. "We don't expect you to forgive us right away. We just hope you'll give us a chance to prove we can do better." "Why should we?" Travis asked, his voice steady despite a faint tremor. "You made us feel like we didn't matter, like nothing we did was good enough." "You're right," my mother said, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "We did that, and it was wrong. And we're so sorry." The lunch lasted 2 hours. The food barely touched as we navigated this delicate new territory. My parents asked about school, about baseball and science projects, about the Grand Canyon trip and our summer adventures. They listened with genuine interest, asking follow-up questions that proved they were truly hearing what the boys said. When we finally left, my mother asked if they could call sometimes, just to check in. Travis and Owen agreed, still cautious, but willing to try. Educational insight 4. The power of boundaries in rebuilding relationships. Establishing clear and firm boundaries is not an act of rejection, but an essential component of healthy relationships, especially when trust has been broken. Boundaries communicate self-respect and clarify expectations, creating a safer space for interaction. In the context of family, they serve as a protective mechanism, preventing the reoccurrence of harmful patterns and allowing for the potential of a new, more respectful dynamic to emerge. This isn't about punishment, but about creating conditions for genuine connection. The months that followed brought slow, careful rebuilding. My parents called once a week, conversations that started awkwardly but gradually became more natural. They sent cards for no reason, just thinking of you notes that acknowledged small accomplishments and daily joys. They asked before sending gifts, respecting boundaries, mindful of creating any appearance of favoritism. Vanessa, unsurprisingly, didn't take kindly to the new family dynamics. She accused my parents of choosing my family over hers, of punishing Madison for their mistakes. The rift between my sister and me became a chasm, one I had no interest in bridging unless she could acknowledge her role in the damage done. My parents held firm though, refusing to enable Vanessa's behavior any longer. They loved Madison, made sure she knew it, but declined to participate in the constant comparison and competition Vanessa tried to foster. Thanksgiving approached with uncertainty hanging over the holiday. My mother called to ask if we'd consider joining them, making it clear that Vanessa and her family would not be attending. "We'd like to start new traditions," she said. "Ones built on respect and equality, where everyone feels valued." Travis and Owen agreed to try, and we spent Thanksgiving Day in my parents' house for the first time since the previous Christmas Eve. The atmosphere was different, quieter perhaps, but genuine in ways our family gatherings hadn't been before. My mother made sure to ask each boy about their specific interests and achievements, celebrating them equally and enthusiastically. My father engaged them in conversations about their futures, their dreams, their opinions on everything from baseball statistics to space exploration. After dinner, while my father and the boys were watching football, my mother and I cleaned up in the kitchen. She washed dishes while I dried, falling into the familiar rhythm we'd had when I was young. "Thank you," she said quietly, handing me a dripping plate. "For giving us this chance. Thank you for earning it." I dried the plate carefully, setting it in the cabinet. It couldn't have been easy, standing up to Vanessa. It was necessary. She paused, her hands still in the soapy water. "I failed you all, but especially Travis and Owen. I let my desire to please everyone blind me to who I was hurting. That stops now." We finished the dishes in comfortable silence, and I realized that this, finally, felt like home again. Not the same home it had been before. Not unchanged by what had happened, but something new, being built on the ruins of what had broken. Christmas came around again, a full year since everything had fallen apart. My parents invited us to celebrate with them, and this time, when we arrived, the house felt welcoming rather than fraught with tension. The tree was decorated beautifully, and beneath it sat presents wrapped with care. When the time came to exchange gifts, my mother and father made a point of presenting Travis and Owen with identical boxes, wrapped in matching paper. "For two grandsons who make us proud every single day," my father said, his voice firm and clear. "Your kindness, your intelligence, your resilience, and your capacity for forgiveness humble us." The boys opened their gifts to find high-quality cameras, equipment that would support their different interests, but was equal in value and thoughtfulness. Travis, who'd become interested in sports photography, got a camera perfect for action shots. Owen, fascinated by nature and science, received one ideal for macro photography and outdoor exploration. Their faces lit up with genuine delight, and I watched my parents watch them, saw the joy and relief in their expressions as they finally got it right. We stayed late that Christmas Eve, longer than we'd ever stayed before. Travis and Owen showed their grandparents photos they'd already started taking with their new cameras, explaining shutter speeds and compositions with an enthusiasm that made my parents beam. We played board games, drank hot chocolate, and laughed together in ways I thought might never happen again. Driving home that night, snow falling gently outside the car windows, Owen spoke up from the back seat. "Dad, I'm glad we gave them another chance." Travis nodded in agreement. "Me too." I glanced at them in the rearview mirror, these two incredible boys who had been hurt but had chosen grace over bitterness, growth over grudges. "Your mom would be proud of you both," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I know I am." The healing was incomplete, and probably never would be entirely. Scars remained from that Christmas Eve when they'd been made to feel unworthy, when their accomplishments had been dismissed and their value questioned. But they'd learned something important through the pain, that they had the strength to demand respect, the courage to walk away from situations that diminished them, and the wisdom to recognize genuine change when it appeared. My parents had learned something too. They'd learned that love without respect is hollow, that pride in grandchildren must be freely given and equally distributed, that family bonds can be broken by thoughtlessness and cruelty, but rebuilt through honest effort and demonstrated change. As for me, I'd learned that protecting my children sometimes meant making hard choices, burning bridges when necessary, and standing firm in the face of family pressure. I'd learned that Sarah's physical absence didn't mean her influence was gone, that the values we'd shared and the strength she'd embodied lived on in how I raised our sons. The next year brought continued growth. My parents attended Travis's baseball games and Owen's science fair, cheering equally for both and making sure each boy knew how special he was. They sent cards celebrating small victories and big ones, maintained consistent contact, and never again made either boy feel less than. Vanessa and I barely spoke, our relationship reduced to polite nods at the few extended family events we both attended. Madison, caught in her mother's bitterness, remained distant from Travis and Owen. I felt sad about that, about cousins who might have been close, but were kept apart by adult dysfunction. But I couldn't fix everything. Some relationships were casualties of necessary boundaries. What mattered most was that Travis and Owen knew their worth, understood that they deserved to be treated with respect and recognition, and had the tools to demand nothing less from everyone in their lives. They'd seen their father walk away from family rather than accept mistreatment. And they'd witnessed the power of standing firm in your convictions while remaining open to genuine reconciliation. These were lessons I hoped would serve them well throughout their lives, guiding them through relationships and challenges yet to come. Sarah and I had wanted to raise strong, compassionate men who knew their value and treated others with dignity. Despite the pain of that Christmas Eve, or perhaps because of it, I believed we were succeeding. Years from now, when Travis and Owen had children of their own, I hope they'd remember this chapter of their lives. Not for the hurt, but for the healing. Not for the rejection, but for the resilience they'd shown. Not for how they'd been treated, but for how they'd responded with grace and wisdom beyond their years. That was the real gift, the one no wrapped box could ever contain. The knowledge that they were worthy of love and respect, and the strength to walk away from anyone who couldn't provide it. But it begs a question for all of us. When does the ideal of family become an excuse for accepting unacceptable behavior? And at what point does loyalty to our own well-being, or the well-being of our children, demand that we choose ourselves, even if it means walking away from those we're supposed to love?